many times that the Shulchan Aruch says that something's mutter, but it says you should be machmir, like specifically you should be machmir in this case. Is this to be treated as a preference or an obligation to us?
Yeah, so the Shulchan Aruch has a very wide range of expressions that are used to indicate a possibility of being strict. A very common expression, and this is very fascinating, is the halacha is so and so, but if you want to be machmir, tavo alav bracha. If you want to be machmir, you will be blessed, or a blessing should come upon you. Now it's very interesting that tavo alav bracha is often written as an abbreviation. And as an abbreviation, it spells the word ta'ev, which means it's an abomination. So it seems pretty clear that on one hand, Shulchan Aruch is saying, oh, you have a bracha. It's really hinting that it's not always a proper thing, that if you're doing it, you're a little fanatic. So tavo alav bracha seems to be, and it's not taken that way. A lot of people take it as, it means I should be machmir. But it seems very, very clear from the use of the Rashi Teva that it actually is a euphemism for basically saying avoid it. So it really depends on what particular lashon you are referring to. But things like bal nefesh yachmir, a person with a sensitive neshama, should be strict. That would indicate that it's better to go on the strict side. So there are different types of lashonos that are going to be used. So it is hard to generalize, and of course, in all of this, we have to remember Rav Dessler's very important observation. Rav Dessler said that most of us, maybe all of us, have limited spiritual energies. So every time we devote extra energy in one area, there's going to be a shortfall or a deficiency in some other area. It's like a bed sheet that's too small for the bed, right? So you pull it to cover that end, so the other end gets exposed. So you got to be very, very careful. If the halacha permits something and you want to be extra strict, you want to be extra machmir, you have to ask yourself, what will this cause me to neglect? A very simple example. Let's say you want to learn an extra 2 hours at night, but as a result, you're going to be tired and grouchy the next day. So have you gained from the chumrah, or have you actually hurt yourself? Or shalom bayis, a person takes on certain chumras that create tension with his wife. Once again, have you gained or have you lost? So Rav Dessler makes a very important point that, in the abstract, you can always say, well, better to be machmir. But you always have to ask, at what cost? What's going to be the cost of being machmir? So this is a very important cheshbon that a person has to make in determining whether to go beyond the halacha or not. But in terms of the expressions, it quite literally depends on the nature of the expression that's being used. Just to give you one little example, nothing really to do directly with your question. The halacha of sukkah, many of you have learned Masechah Sukkah, is that just like sechach cannot be something that is makabel tuma, even the support of the sechach cannot be something that's makabel tuma. Right? So, for example, you can't have metal bars and put the sechach directly on metal bars. Okay. But we paskin, however, that the walls can be made of metal because the walls are not, provided the walls are not directly supporting the sechach, that's not a problem. So the Chazon Ish, however, has a chumrah that the laws of Maimid is support, is so strict that you can't even have nails in a wooden sukkah wall, because the nails are holding up the wall, and the wall is holding up the poles, and the poles are holding up the sechach, and therefore the nails make the whole sukkah puzzle. So a Chazon Ish sukkah is something that has no metal whatsoever in any part of the sukkah because of the din of Maimid. So Rav Shach used to say that at one point in his youth, when he was relatively younger, he wanted to be machmir like the Chazon Ish and kind of build a sukkah which had absolutely not a single nail in any wall. And then in the middle, he started thinking, my father didn't have such a sukkah, my grandfather didn't have such a sukkah, the Balabatim in Lithuania didn't have such a sukkah. He says, who am I to think that I have to be nayeg like a das yochid that is super chumrah, that's going beyond the letter of the law? So Lemaiser of Shach said he gave up that idea precisely because he thought that this was not a chumrah for everybody. So all I'm saying is that the notion that it's always better to be machmir, one has to think about that very, very carefully in terms of what the costs are. Everything has a cost. Every decision has a cost. Anything you pursue means you're pursuing something less on the other side. And then you have to ask yourself, based on, I hate to use business terms, but based on a cost-benefit analysis, are you gaining more than you're losing? You're losing more than you're gaining. Ohr Somayach is a beautiful example of love of Hashem, love of Torah, love of Am Yisrael. And that is something we absolutely need all the time. That's going to bring Mashiach. And we especially need it at a time of war, at a time of danger, at a time when, frankly, lives could be lost, chas v'shalom. So I turn to our dear friends, who are both Yissachars and Zevuluns, to generously support an institution for 50 years. There's a record of success, and without your help, we're not going to be able to do it. So in the merit of your support of Torah, your support of Ohr Somayach, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless you and your families with all of the brachos that Hashem gives to those who support the Torah, and in the merit of that limit HaTorah, may Klal Yisrael and the world merit shalom, peace, tranquility, and may this bring us ever closer to the Geula Shalema B'mheira V'yameinu. Okay. Yeah.
The Pasha Shulchan quotes the Gra that music has like a special like kayach, it's like the power of the neshama has like a big kayach of music, and that a lot of kabbalah can be found in music itself. Is there a reason why music specifically was chosen as like that sort of kayach, and also why Hashem would create like a sidestep to connect to ruchnius as opposed to doing Torah mitzvahs?
Yeah, it's a very good question. First, just a little bit of bibliographical information for those who are not familiar. He just mentioned the Sefer Pas HaShulchan. Pas HaShulchan literally means the corners, the peah of the Shulchan. This was a Sefer written by one of the great Talmidim of the Gra on the mitzvahs tuliyos b'aretz, like Truma, Meiser, Peah, Shemitah, which are not covered in the Shulchan Aruch. So it's called the Peah, the extra corner of the Shulchan. Rabbi Yisrael of Shklav, it's one of the Iker Svarim on mitzvos, the halachas of mitzvahs tuliyos b'aretz. At the time it was written, it was not so nogei l'maaseh, because there weren't that many Jews who were involved in agriculture here in Eretz Yisrael. Today, of course, it is constantly used, although it's upgraded by Charedim and the like. But in the Pas HaShulchan, particularly in the Hakdama, there are a number of interesting teachings from the Gra that have nothing to do with mitzvahs tliyos b'aretz itself. And one of them is, there is a discussion about the kayach of nigun, the kayach of music, and the fact that music is a way that it's ma'orer your neshama in very powerful ways, for good or for bad, meaning it's a gateway of great, great kedusha. And for that reason itself, I think last week we may have discussed this as well, it can also be a gateway to tumah, because whatever it is, it deeply penetrates you, and it can change you. So when it's used in the right way, there's a very, very high madrega. This is called the Shar HaNigun. This is why, L'maisa, a nigun has a kayach even when there are no words. It's not the lyrics, it's not the message per se that is mashpia, it's the nigunim itself. In fact, among Hasidus at least, it says a nigun without words is actually a higher madrega. It cannot be concretized in speech. And of course, in the Beis HaMikdash, all the korbanos were accompanied, at least the korban sibors, not the korban yachid, but the korban sibor, tamid, musaf, was accompanied by shiras leviim, and the shira was both vocal music and instrumental too, instrumental music as well. In fact, a little bit of trivia, the reason why the Reformed synagogues in the early 19th century took on the name temple, like why are Reformed synagogues called temple? Because the very first innovation they did, before they got much worse, was they introduced an organ. They introduced musical instruments in the Shabbos service. Meaning otherwise it was an Orthodox service, let's say, but They had a and sometimes they had a guy playing it. And they tiny, well, how could this be bad? In the Beis Hamikdash, they played musical instruments, even on Shabbos. And a shul is a miniature temple, Beis Mikdash Ma'at. So they actually used the name temple to give them a heter to do what they wanted to do with musical instruments on Shabbos. Okay, but be it as it may, in the Beis Hamikdash itself, music was obviously used. So the question is, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do that? I don't know. I mean, but I'll tell you this. One thing that is very interesting is there is a very close relationship between music and mathematics in terms of what types of sounds are considered pleasing to the human ear. It is connected to mathematical correlations. Mathematics, in turn, and you see this both in physics and in Sefer Yetzirah, were kind of the kochos through which the whole universe was created. So if mathematics, in fact, it's a secular expression, but mathematicians have the expression, mathematics is the language of God in creating the world. Now, if that is so, then music is going to be connected to the mathematical structures. Now, you may say, well, wait a second. Don't we believe that the aleph base is the structure? Yes, that's true. But remember, the aleph base has gematrias. So ultimately, even the idea that the world was created through the various combinations of the aleph base is actually a numerical calculation based on different sequences of gematrias. So it's all very much connected. So I would posit, although this doesn't fully answer the question, that the koyach of music is connected to mathematics, which in turn is the koyach through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. By the way, get a little bit of interesting information. We obviously do not have the actual nigunim. We don't have the music that the leviim used in the Beis Hamikdash. We don't have that. We know the Tehillim they said, but we don't have the music itself. But some have suggested that the Gregorian chants, lahavdil, of the Catholic Church, which are very, very, very ancient, they may have dated from the time of the Chorban by Yesheni. That was the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and there were Jews who were taken as slaves to Rome, and they may have known some of the Nigunim, and the Catholic Church was in Rome, etc. So some have said that the Gregorian chants might in fact be a remnant. I have no idea if that's true, but it is a possibility. Who knows? But this is the koyach of nigun. I think the Gra may have said, even as a joke, even the Vilna Gaon made an occasional joke. There's a Yiddish saying, "Alla chazanim zayin naranim," which means all chazanim are fools. Why would you call the chazan a fool? So the word goes, because the Sharei Negina is right next to the gates of tshuva. And the chazanim are so close, and they don't jump into the other gate, meaning to say they don't jump into the Shara Tshuva, even though they're as close as you could possibly get to the gates of tshuva. But that is the koyach of Negina.
There's a concept of dibbukim and shedim. Is there any correlation to that and ghosts? And you these ghost hunters that claim you have
yeah.
and these ghosts. Are these coincidences or faked, or are these is there a source for this?
Yeah. So in Kabbalah, there's all sorts of other worldly types things. Some of which are in the Gemara itself, some of which are not. The Gemara, the Bavli at least, the Yishalmi much less, talks about shedim, demons. In Kabbalah, there is the idea of a dibbuk. A dibbuk is a soul of a dead person that cannot find peace because of its usually averos. So it enters, it looks around for a place where it could enter, and you can be possessed by it. And then you need an exorcism, quite literally, to drive the neshama out. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman had a famous Maisa. He was in the presence of the Chafetz Chaim when the Chafetz Chaim drove out a dibbuk that had possessed a girl, etc. And Rabbi Chanan said this as a true story. He only said it on Purim, but he did not say it as a joke. He said it as an absolutely true story. On the other hand, some people are skeptical, even some Mekubalim. Rav Yaakov Hillel, Shalita across the street is a Mekubal, Rosh Yeshiva Mekubal, And because of this, in Yerushalayim, people are always looking for Kabbalistic, cures for things. So people are always coming to him about dibbuk, and he always says, I like to call him the non-Kabbalist Mekubal. He always says, go to a psychiatrist first. After you go to the psychiatrist, then you can talk to me about dibbuk, which means that's really the part of the problem, that a lot of these phenomena which people want to describe in Kabbalistic ways might be mental illness, there might be schizophrenia. That doesn't deny that there is a spiritual mitzias of these things, but it's not automatically the first thing that you assume. We're mechuyev to deal with chayli and refuah, and then afterwards we look for more extreme measures. Now, a lot of this does correspond with people say there are ghosts around, there are demons around. So, so if you're asking me, could these reports be possibly true? The answer is they might be possibly true, but they can also be fake. So the fact that we recognize such a phenomena does not legitimate or validate people who have all sorts of mishugas. Maybe they need to see a psychiatrist or whatever it is. But on the other hand, at least if one is a maimin in Kabbalah, we would not dismiss this as impossible, meaning it's shaykh. Taka is shaykh. Just to give you another example, although this is interesting, the Mekubalim very much believed in Gilgal, reincarnation. Now, the reason I say the Mekubalim is because this is not one of the Ikrei Emunah. The Rambam, for example, does not mention reincarnation, and Rav Sadia Gaon specifically mentions it and says it is not a Jewish belief. So there are Makairis that say no such thing as Gilgal, and yet we know from the Arizal, Rav Chaim Vital, the Gra later, the Ramchal, all the Mekubalim took on, there is a concept of Gilgal in the world. And in fact, they say it is very rare that new neshamas are born today, meaning all of us are recycled, maybe more than once. Some say in the name of Rav Chaim Vital that if you're born on Shabbos, you might be a new neshama. So I don't know if anybody here is born on Shabbos, but if you're not born on Shabbos, for sure, you're a recycled neshama. So here's the thing. There's a whole branch of either science or pseudoscience, which is called past life regression, where people either under hypnosis or various other ways, they recall past lives that they have. They remember, Lincoln's assassination, or they remember being in the Holocaust. In fact, a from woman wrote a whole book about people, Jewish people who were born, they're like maybe 15 years old or whatever it is, and they have distinct memories of being in concentration camps and the like. So the interesting thing is that you might think, most logically, past life regression is a very good raya to the idea of Gilgal. Because if you say there's no such thing as Gilgal, how would I remember prior lives? And yet I heard from my own Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yaakov Weinberg, although I never heard an explanation for it. He said that's not possible because he said for him, and I don't know why he feels this way, but he said for him it was a davar pashut, that you have no possible memory of past lives. Because that even if you're maimin in Gilgal, it's not shaykh to be in your zikaron. So if a past life is somehow recalled in memory, it's not because you had that past life. Maybe you read something, maybe you saw a movie. The mind works in different ways. You could see a picture and your brain could make it into a whole thing. So he actually said that past life regression b'dafka is not a raya to Gilgal. It represents other things. Although the Maisa, I remember reading a Maisa, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, who felt he was a Gilgal of a Kayin Gadol. So he was the Baal Tefillah from Musaf on Yom Kippur. So in the Musaf of Yom Kippur, there's the Seder Avodah, and he says, V'kach haya omer, the Kohen Gadol used to say, Ana Hashem chatasi avidui. So when he would daven for the Amud, he would say, Kach hayisi omer, this is what I used to say. So I don't know, apparently he said he did have a memory, so I don't know. But all I'm saying is, the fact that such phenomena exist doesn't mean that your particular feeling is going to link in with the emes. Okay.
I was supposed to do
Wow, mazel tov.
Thank you. And it felt like when I was doing it, it felt just like very cruel, especially because I wasn't keeping the eggs. Like we weren't like eating them or using them. So two questions. First, has it always been like the Masorah or halacha that even if you're not going to eat them, you're still supposed to do it? And Shiluach Haken, like you do it even if you're not going to eat them or use the eggs.
Yeah.
And also, why would Hashem make if that is the case, that it has always been like that, then why would Hashem make mitzvah that's meant to give you rachmanas, but like it seems so anti that?
Yeah. So Shiluach Haken, is a mitzvah in the Torah, and it is one of two mitzvahs where the Torah explicitly promises you arichos yamim if you keep it. One is kibbut aviyim, and the other is Shiluach Haken. But if you remember, it was precisely that promise that made Elisha ben Abuya become an apikoros, because he once saw a father tell a child, climb up on the tree and chase away the mother and take the eggs. And the child climbed up on the tree and was going to chase away the mother, and the child fell off the tree and the child died. And Elisha ben Abuya said the kid was doing the two mitzvahs where the Torah promises life, and he did both of them, and he dies. So the Torah got to be, God forbid, false. And the Gemara explains that the arichos yamim ultimately is olam haba, so it's not lav dafka olam hazeh. Okay, be it as it may. But here's the thing. If you simply read the psukim, which of course we don't just interpret the Torah based on just reading the psukim, but if you simply read the psukim, you're 100% correct. It is very, very clear that Shiluach Haken is talking about a situation where I want the eggs. I want the eggs. And the Torah says, do not take the mother and the eggs, send away the mother, so the mother should not see as you appropriate her eggs. Meaning, if I want the eggs, there's a mitzvah of Shiluach Haken. But what if I don't want the bird's eggs? What am I going to do with bird's eggs? I have no interest. So the pashtus of the pasuk is, Shiluach Haken is not a mitzvah that you go out of your way to do, meaning I can walk by a bird's nest. I don't have to shoo away the mother. I don't want the eggs. So indeed, you have to know, many shittas and rishonim say exactly that. In other words, the idea that is so nafutz today that I got to go out of my way for Shiluach Haken was lav dafka a sheet of many rishonim. Many rishonim say Shiluach Haken is a mitzvah that if you want the eggs, you send away the mother. You don't want the eggs, you don't send away the mother. You don't have to do it at all. So it's important to know that Haredim, that many say that is the halacha. So what changed this orientation was actually the Zohar Kadosh. So essentially, the idea that this is something I have to try to do is really from the influence of Mekubalim, in which the Zohar said, and this is kind of strange, that the tsar, that the mother, in other words, you do want to cause the mother to feel tsar. The tsar that the mother feels as you separate her from her children somehow awakens, and I can't say I understand this, the tsar of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he is separated from us, and therefore it brings us closer to Geula. That was the Zohar's idea, that you're ma'orer rachamei Hashem by somehow being ma'orer the tsar of the mother bird, that's ma'orer the Shechina, which is also feminine, the Shechina, and that brings rachamim to Klal Yisrael. Based on the Zohar, it became, in Eretz Yisrael especially, it became very nafutz that a person looks for the opportunities to do Shiluach Haken. Now, when I was growing up, they used to always tell us that, of course, you have to pick up the eggs. You have to be kind of the eggs, right? That is important, even though you don't want them. So I was always taught that once a human hand touches the eggs, the mother will never come back, which would mean, in other words, they're going to die. So, which made Shiluach Haken even more difficult to kind of do. Like, what am I doing here? But Lamaisa, I am told that.
Came right back.
Yes, I am told that it's not true. So, in a sense, at least, you're not causing a permanent separation. So I think that could take away some of the conscious pangs that a person might have. Shiluach Haken. The Zohar does talk about it as being ma'orer rachamei shemayim, and therefore there is, at least it's the minhag now is that you try to look for those opportunities. Now, it is a little complicated because it has to be a female, it has to be a kosher bird, and it has to be a female bird. And the reason it's complicated is in different species, the male and the female alternate. Some night, day, etc. And since it's almost impossible for a non-professional to tell the difference between a male bird and a female bird, so you really have to look up the internet, look up lists that tell you robins are this way, etc. And they tell you some birds you can only be mishaleach in the day because at night the male sits, and some birds only at night because the male sits in the day, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can only do it if it's hefker, meaning if it's owned by you. For example, you certainly don't have to do Shiluach Haken when you collect eggs from a chicken. That's in your chicken coop. So depending on where the nest is situated, if you are kona the nest through chatzir, being in your courtyard, you cannot do Shiluach Haken until you're mafkir the nest, and you have to be mafkir in front of three people. So there are certain technicalities. You're not makayim it if it's a treif bird, you're not makayim it if it's a male bird, and you're not makayim it if you own the birds through the halachas of kinyan and you didn't do a proper hefker. Now, because of that, though, after you acquire the eggs, you can actually be remafkir in front of three so that the next guy could do the mitzvah. You see? Yeah.
Can I just spell the case now?
Yeah, sure.
This nest was inside of my brother's apartment. It was inside the windowsill of his apartment.
Yeah.
He leased it. He rents an apartment from someone else, and he didn't. I don't think he was mocked for it. I don't know if he knew about it. Does it automatically become his because it's in his windowsill? Does it become the owner's? Because the owner owns it.
Yeah. So generally speaking, if you are a renter, you're a tenant, you would be kona b'chatzer, that which rests in your property, because you're considered to be the owner for that particular amount of time. Okay, so I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not 100% sure you were Mekayim the mitzvah, and that may be. In fact, it's interesting. Shiluach Haken does not have a bracha, and it's an interesting question. Why don't you make a bracha? It's a mitzvah deraisa, but part of it might be because of all of these fakas, Zachor and Nekeva, etc. So it's a suffix bracha lahakel, and we don't make a bracha on Shiluach Haken. But it is a mitzvah that there are pictures of gedolim, old people. It's not so easy. They're on a ladder and whatever it is, trying to be Makayim Shiluach Haken. So the Zohar HaKadosh says there is a need to seek it out. But again, I want to just repeat that many Rishonim did not understand the mitzvah that way, and they just said, if you want the eggs, send away the mother. You don't want the eggs. What do you have to do? Yeah.
Apart from some of the modal chants in Christian liturgy, are there any other sources of the stories regarding Tehillim as to how they may have been sung?
I'm sorry, did you ask, in other words, are there any sources on the music of the leviim? No, not really. What we do have sources on the musical instruments. What types of things, string instruments and percussion instruments, and there's both musicologists and there are svarim that have tried to identify them, and based on ancient instruments in the world. Actual music, I don't think so. Now, obviously, we have trup, and as you know, or maybe you should know, that we have the same trup or the same cymbals in Torah, Neviim, and Kesuvim, but they're sung different ways, right? The Torah is sung one way, Neviim is sung one way, Megillos is sung another way. So you should know that there are 3 svarim that have a unique trup, and that they're called Sifrei Emes, the books of truth, which stands for Iyuv, Mishlei, Tehillim. The trup for Iyuv, Mishlei, Tehillim is said to be unique, and it is not comparable to Megillos, not the Neviim, and certainly not the Torah. Some say we don't really know what the trup of how MS sounded. Others do have a Messiah. You can actually find it. And some want to connect that maybe at least for Tehillim, maybe the trup of MS was the trup of the Nigunim in the Beis HaMikdash. Others say it has nothing to do with it. How we read Tehillim does not correspond to how they sang Tehillim in the Beis HaMikdash. So as far as I know, I'm not aware of it, but I'll look around and see if there's any research. Yeah.
I've heard that R'Chaim Kanievsky has a shita that a person who's going to go daven by a minion, but he doesn't have a hat and jacket, shouldn't daven tzibur like by that minion. He should go and get his hat and jacket. Is there a reason why having a hat and jacket, which seemingly is something that's come around within the last couple hundred years, would take precedence over tefillah tzibur?
Yeah, it is true. R'Chaim Kanievsky is quoted. I'm not sure. I did not see it in his own language, but I didn't look around. But he is quoted as saying that a hat and jacket, even a hat, and Lag BaOmer jacket, which is actually more important, is so important that even if you're going to miss, he didn't just say go to a later minyan. I believe he's quoted as even if you're going to daven b'yechidus, he says it is kedai to miss tefillah b'tzibur in order to wear a hat and jacket for tefillah. That's well, Rav Chaim said it. Rav Chaim said it. Obviously, you can rely upon it. But I believe that most poskim do not agree. Most poskim will give kedima to tefillah b'tzibur, as long as, maybe, now it could be maybe if you're dressed in a bathing suit or whatever it is, that might be one thing. But if you're dressed in a way that is a dignified manner, we would not be ma'akev tefillah b'tzibur because of that. But basically, the reason why he's very strict is he says there is halacha for tefillah that you're omed lifnei hamelech, you're standing before the king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore you have to dress in the way that you would go to meet the president or a business meeting or whatever it would be. And he holds that inyan of kavod tefillah is ma'akev, even tefillah b'tzibur. But it is a very big chiddush. But this is what he said. He did take that position. But again, Rav Chaim has certain chumras on certain inyanim. I'm wondering, although I don't know for sure, maybe I shouldn't say this, that sometimes a psak like this might be motivated almost as a precaution to prevent pritzus, meaning to say, if you would be told you can daven with a minyan without a hat and jacket, so I'm not going to bother to get my hat and jacket. So maybe, even if miyikar adin, you should be allowed to daven that way. He wanted to make the point, no, because that's going to guarantee that you're going to get your hat and jacket, right? Because people don't want to miss minyan, legamri. So I'm just wondering, maybe I don't have the right to say that, but I'm just wondering if this was a harass shah to prevent a pirza in that inyan.
Nowadays, where hats are not considered, they're widely unaccepted. And obviously, the world is taking a step down, but even in business meetings or you're going to
yeah,
people don't generally wear hats.
Yeah, there was a legend, although I understand that it wasn't true, but as I was growing up, I heard this story. If you look at pictures in the United States of even goyim, business people in the 1950s, men used to wear hats in the street. It was a dignified way of behaving. And the legend goes, that John F. Kennedy, who became president in January 1961, until him, all the presidents wore top hats and everything else. He wanted to portray a youthful, energetic person. In the winter, he didn't wear a hat. So it is said that destroyed the hat industry in the United States. So the only people who wear hats are from yeshiva guys. And for some reason, the black population still wears hats. I don't know exactly why. But it couldn't really sustain the hat industry. Now, the Maisa, that's sheker v'chaza, because the truth of the matter is there actually is a picture of John F. Kennedy at the inauguration wearing a hat. He took it off for the oath of office, but the Maisa, he wore a hat in the inauguration. Now, but it is true that people stop wearing hats and people stop wearing jackets, especially in Israel. Now, one of the reasons why in the Dati Leumi world, they're always walking around just with white shirts, is al pi halacha. They say in Israel, this is how you go to meetings. In fact, I remember I was at a Dati Leumi chasna, and the Rav Mesader Kedushin was giving a very, very nice drasha. So I was listening to the drasha, but there was this like big guy with a white shirt with the shirt hanging out, and I couldn't see the Rav because this big guy was blocking my view. So I said to somebody, I wish that big guy would go out, get out of the way. Who is he? He said, oh, he's the Mesader Kedushin who's talking. So he was the Mesader Kedushin who was giving the drasha. And once again, their halachic position is that if this is the way I show up to a chashuva business meeting, it's going to be roy for tefillah. L'maisa, there is a svara like that. I mean, if the getter is omeid b'fnei hamelech, if this is how you're omeid b'fnei hamelech. Now, a hat does have another reason, though. In other words, hat and jacket for two reasons. One is it's the formal, dignified dress, and that l'chayra changes with time. The other is that some are machmir, that for haskaras shem shemayim, you either have two kisuyim, two coverings, yarmulke, talis, or yarmulke hat, although some say that any yarmulke with a lining is two coverings. And the other svara would be you have to cover all of your head. So unless you have like a breslov or a kippah, whatever it will be, a regular yarmulke may not be maspik. So those svaras would not depend on change. So memela, the chilukei deis might be a little bit whether the reason for a hat is omeid b'fnei hamelech or the reason for a hat is shnei kisoyin or covering the entire head. So that's why there would be chilukei minhagim. And here too, I'm going to be a little sociological, and that is, once something gets identified as the uniform of B'nai Torah, so there's a certain idea that, just like a gang, right? Gangs have to wear the right uniform, or they can get killed, right? You got to wear the right uniform. So there is a musik. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but it's a mitzias that this is kind of, what team do you belong to? So that's like a secondary reason for that. I'll give you an example. Why is it makubal that a ben Torah, not that you have to do this either, but is supposed to wear a hat even when he's on a bus? Why is that? At most, a hat might be an aspect of hilchos tefillah. Mehechi teisi, I have to wear a hat when I go to a store. That's absolutely so. If you follow that, I'm not saying you have to follow it. If you follow that, that's vade because of the uniform business. It's nothing to do with halacha. At most, halacha would only be nageya to the proper levush of tefillah. It wouldn't be nageya to walking in the street with a hat, without a hat, or the like. I heard a maisa that a guy was taking out garbage in his shirt sleeves, and somebody said, "This is going to affect the shidduch for your daughters." All right, at some point, it just becomes a little bit crazy. Okay, yeah.
Why we Lag BaOmer we put the one farmhouse that is very ish.
Very what?
That's the one farmhouse.
Yeah, bonfires. Yeah.
Very ish.
Avodah zarish. Yeah, fires. Yeah. Yeah, well, I tell you, the kids in the neighborhoods look forward to Lag BaOmer mamash the entire year. Every child, maybe adults too, is an amateur pyromaniac, loves to play with fire. We play with fire, and this gives them a chance to mamash play with fire. So I'm not going to take that away, from a kid. But the makor of bonfires on Lag BaOmer, it's a makor because you see in Meron, for example, the most chashuva Hasidic Rebbes are lighting bonfires. It really comes because Lag BaOmer was the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was megala, the panimias, the inner meanings of the Torah that were later put in the Sefer HaZohar. And the word Zohar itself means light, brightness, Zohar. And therefore, to show that this was the day in which great, great light was revealed to the world. So we have fire, which generates all of that light. So it's connected to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai B'Davka. So it's not Avodah Zarah. Avada, if you're going to worship fire, yeah, you're right, 100%. But fire is a symbol like of Torah, of light, of warmth, and that shows that this was a day of great revelation of the Panemius HaTorah. I had mentioned in an earlier shir that people say that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter on Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is his yard site. So I just want to point out one thing. There is no makor in Chazal that say that he died on Lag BaOmer. The only makor that he died on Lag BaOmer is from the Kisvei HaRizal. Now, Kisvei Ari, by the way, is not from the Ari. The Ari didn't wrote very, very little. All of the many volumes that are Kisvei Ari are the writings of Rav Chaim Vital, who wrote B'Shem. Okay, but be it as it may, but in one of Rav Chaim Vital's Svarim, Lag BaOmer is described as Yom Shemespo, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But some have pointed out that that may be a printing mistake. In the original version, it did not say Yom Shemes, it says Yom Simchas, the day of the rejoicing of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, but in a later edition, the ches was taken out. So if you take ches out of the word Simchas, you get Shin Mem Saf, which could be read Shemes. So the whole reading of Yom Shemes is based, or might be based, on the erroneous deletion of ches in the printing. So we really do not have a raya. Thank you. We really do not have a raya that he died on Lag BaOmer. Okay, that's just something to be aware of. Okay, yeah.
Dus die mag het specifiek het only possibly taking place during Chalamot. Why during during Shmir says not people dance the Torah. We only dance during Chalamot, not during the.
Well, when you say Simchas Beis Shoeva, I mean, there are a few things that you're talking about. If you're talking about the mitzvah in the Beis HaMikdash to pour water on the Mizbeach, that Vadai was done on Yom Tov and on Shabbos. The Simcha refers to the lighting of torches, doing malacha. So, Memela, the lighting of torches and all of that stuff, that was not done on Yom Tov because that's not called, there's an Isra Malacha. The Simcha was not called Tzorech enough. It was not Ochel Nefesh. But the mitzvah of Nisa Chamayim was Vadai done on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay. So you're asking me, did they dance? Because there is a halacha, although we're makel today in a lot of ways, but there is a halacha Medina, the Mishnah, that you don't do dancing on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Well, they didn't have the celebration, so they didn't. That means they didn't. I mean, Mamela, they didn't dance.
Why we get dance and Shmir Sabbath?
You're asking about today?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So let's examine our Samech. I mean, the truth is, we dance all the time. I mean, we dance on a regular Shabbos. Not me, but we dance on an Ufraf. We dance, So we're Samech on Taisvus in Maseches Beya, where Taisvus in Maseches Beya says that the only type of dancing that was forbidden was a professional type of dancing, which could lead to musical accompaniment and the like. But if all you're doing is going around in a circle and you're not doing anything fancy, we're makel. So some people are not somech on that, but some people are. But for Simchas Torah, the poskim say beferish that because of kavod HaTorah, the Chachamim didn't make their gezerah. So Simchas Torah, every type of dancing is in fact permitted. But we are soimech even on a regular Shabbos to allow non-professional dancing because Taisus Maseches Beya says it's only a particular type of dancing that was forbidden. Yeah.
Is there any legitimacy to the fact that Chazal sent Shia to distance you a Christian?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Is
Chazal sent the shliach to distance the early Christians.
Sent the shaliach.
To distance the early Christians.
You're referring to Peter, Paul? You're referring to that particular story? Yeah. So again, some people might not be familiar with this story. There is a story, although the Christians say it over differently, but there is a story that Peter, whose name is Shimon Kippah. Shimon Kippah is Simon Peter, because Kippah in Aramaic means rock, and Peter in Greek means rock. So this guy's name was Shimon, and he was renamed by Yoshka himself, Peter, because you are my rock, you will be the foundation. And in our literature, he's known as Shimon Kippah. Peter, as you know, was the first bishop of Rome. Peter was the first pope. Peter was indeed the first pope. So there is a story in a very late medrash. Now, this is not an authoritative medrash. This is a later medieval story that they called the medrash, in which Shimon Kippah was actually a frum Jew who wanted to distance the early Christians from Judaism, because the early Christians were all Jews and they were davening in our shuls, etc. And therefore, he went to the Sanhedrin and he proposed the equivalent of a suicide mission. He said, I will cause Christianity to break away from Judaism. I'll come to them and I'll tell them to forget about the Torah and let's make a separate religion. And he became, Pope, the first head of the Catholic Church after Yeshivas. And his whole life, according to this medrash, he lived as a shomer mitzvahs privately, and externally, he wanted to drive the Christians away from Judaism so they would not influence Jews. And he had one request. He said he composed a prayer, and he asked that he be remembered by having his prayer recited. And according to this medrash, the prayer that he composed was Nishmas, that we recite every Shabbos and at the Pesach Seder. And Nishmas is said to be the composition of Shimon Kippah, in which he's praising Hashem, although he had to live a life in which he was totally menutzer. Machzor Vitri, who was a Talmud of Rashi, he wrote on Tefillah, records the view that Shimon Kippah is the author of Nishmas, although he says it's incorrect. This is important to know. A lot of times you'll see people say, Machzor Vitri says Shimon Kippah wrote Nishmas. That's not emes. Machzor Vitri brings that Yesh Omrim, that Shimon Kippah wrote Nishmas, but he actually argues with him. It is also the case that, we fast on the 10th of Teves. Listen to this. But the Shulchan Aruch brings, there are some tzaddikim who fast on the 8th, 9th, and 10th of Teves. 3-day fasts. And this is what it says. On the 8th of Teves is when the 70 elders completed the Torah in Greek. And that was a big tragedy. The 9th of Teves, I'm not giving you the reason. That's what it says. The Chachamim didn't want to give you the reason. The 10th of Teves is when Nebuchadnezzar began the siege. So this is very mysterious. Some tzaddikim fast on the 9th of Teves, but we don't want to tell you why. So some have posited that the 9th of Teves was the yahrzeit of Shimon Kippah. And l'zecher nishmasai, there were tzaddikim that would fast for him, but they didn't want to publicize who they were fasting for. So that's a little bit of a background. Now, is any of this true? We don't have real makairis. It's a story that is brought down in what is called a late medrash, but it's not really a medrash. It's not from Chazal. It's from the Middle Ages, and we don't know. As I say, obviously Machzor Vitri was aware of this story, but the Machzor Vitri is not makabel the story. So I'm not going to say this as anything true. But going back to your question, so you're asking what is the significance of sending a shaliach? Well, the reason for it was very, very pashut. when Christians were Jews who were in our shuls and in our yeshivos, they were much more dangerous. Just like today, the equivalent of Messianic Jews, very dangerous. We've had meisim here in Yerushalayim. There was a guy, I think he died. Sitches out, Charedi guy, his kids went to Charedi schools. And it turns out he was a Messianic Jewish missionary in Ramat Eshkol. And not only that, it was even worse. He was doing everything. He was a shochet. He was a moel. He wrote Gittin. I don't know how on earth that happened. He was Masader Kedushin. So you got a real problem there, right? Because L'mafreya, is every get puzzle? Is every Kedushin puzzle? The Shechita. A million types of questions. It really was a Rachmanis. It's a very morally, was a very complicated issue. I'm not sure if it's still resolved, because his widow, his wife, who was also a missionary, was left penniless. And the interesting question is, she is Jewish, Messianic Jew. What is your achrayus? Do you help the almana? Do you help the assignment? What exactly do you do? This was a person who was involved in mamish, taking people away from Yiddishkeit. It's not a pashut shaila. It's not a pashut shaila, but the reality of Christians, or not Christians, they're Jews, but people who espouse Christian beliefs, living as religious Jews and being negative influences, is a very real problem. So you can understand the lumdus of why Shimon Kippah would want to separate them from being in the Jewish people. Yeah, in the back.
I was wondering if you could speak to the midrash that says derech eretz kadma Torah.
Yeah. The statements, famous statements in the Medrash in Bereshis, derech eretz kadma Torah, derech eretz kadma precedes Torah. So there are two questions here. What is derech eretz? Number one, what does the term mean? And number two, what does it mean precede? What is? So the last word we know, right? So 3 out of the 4 words are difficult of definition. Derech eretz kadma. Then the last word we at least have some meaning. Lo Torah. So first of all, there are many interpretations of derech eretz. Some refer to derech eretz as mitzvos and masim tovim, and it just means that the whole purpose of learning is that you do the right thing. So living the right life is more important ultimately than even learning, which corresponds to another mimer, lo ha-medrash ha'ikar ela ha-maisa, so it's the same idea. So based on that interpretation, derech eretz means masim tovim. A second interpretation of derech eretz is it refers specifically to the midos tovos of bein adam lechavera, to act with refined character, to treat people with respect, and that's the idea that you have to have derech eretz, or your Torah is not going to last in you. So one interpretation is mitzvos generally. The second interpretation is midos tovos bein adam lechavera, and the third interpretation, which is the way Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch used it in the famous movement that he created called Torah im derech eretz, is that derech eretz means generally being involved in society. In other words, as you know, in the 19th century, the standard Polish-Lithuanian hashkafa in the yeshiva world is you should be as separated from the secular world as possible. They were against universities, they were against secular education. They said, focus only on Torah learning. Now, Rav Hirsch in Germany developed a different type of hashkafa that goes by the words Torah im derech eretz, in which he felt that secular wisdom and knowledge can help and enhance you in your understanding of Torah, like knowing astronomy, knowing math, etc., can help you in understanding Torah. And it also means that it gives you the ability to apply Torah to real situations. In other words, if I learn, here's an example. If I learn Bava Basra, right? That's what you guys learn about Babasa, right? And I learn about courtyards and fences, but I never own property, so it's only theoretical. So Torah and derech eretz means own a piece of property, have a partner, build a fence because of hezek re'iyah. Because what you're doing is you're taking the theoretical principles of Torah, you're putting it into action. So we have at least three interpretations for derech eretz. Mitzvos generally, midos tovos in bein adam lechavero, and involvement in the broader world through Kiddush Hashem and applying the Torah to actual meisim. So all of those are really kind of defining what the ultimate purpose of so kadma means the purpose of Torah is to have these things. Now, I want to point out there's a huge machlokas that exists even to this very day. How to understand Rav Hirsch? Because Rav Hirsch posed, I'm going to simplify it here, so those of you who want to respond by mail, please do not send me mails about this. I know the ambiguities. But the machlokas is the following. Rav Hirsch was a bit of an enigma to the Eastern European Rosh Yeshiva. On one hand, everybody admired him. Everybody considered him to be a chashuv gadol b'Torah. On the other hand, he's going in the exact opposite direction of what they're going. They're saying, learn, stay away from college, stay away from society. And he's saying, no, go to university, and etc. So how do you reconcile, this is cognitive dissonance, how do you reconcile their great personal admiration for Rav Hirsch with the fact that they totally did not agree with his approach? So there's a machlokas how to understand Rav Hirsch. There was an approach in the European yeshivas that Rav Hirsch himself didn't believe his philosophy. Rav Hirsch was dealing with a very assimilated German community, most of whom had become Reform. So he couldn't start talking about go to yeshiva full time. Nobody would listen to him. So he gave them a watered down type of Yiddishkeit that they could live with. And that was a proper thing because that's the most he could accomplish, given the assimilated society that he had. Which means the Rosh Yeshivas were saying, oh, he really agrees with us. But in his population, this is the most he could get away with. In other words, that's the Haraz Shah idea that this was a temporary thing. And to this very day, you go to Lakewood, etc., they will ask him about Rav Hirsch, and they'll say, this is the pshat in Rav Hirsch. On the other hand, from Rav Hirsch's own writings, it almost appears 100% certain that he was talking about a lechatchila and not a b'diavad. And he felt that this was a higher expression of Torah when you apply it in real life instead of just as a theoretical thing. And we should open ourselves up to this secular wisdom. So there's a machlekes to this very day. I'll tell you, the largest kehila based on Rav Hirsch's teachings is actually the successor of Rav Hirsch's shul. Rav Hirsch was the Rav of Frankfurt. And the name of his shul was Kahal Adas Yeshurun. It relocated to the United States, and the shul that's called Breuer's in Washington Heights, Kahal Adas Yeshurun, is the direct successor of Rav Shimon Kippah Hirsch's Kehila. So the founding members were Hirschians. They believed in secular education. They believed in parnasa. You learn every day, but they believed in work and being involved, etc. They were not in favor of kollel. But what happened was a lot of their children and grandchildren became Lakewood people, right? So, Baruch Hashem, better for people to become kollel than, God forbid, go in the other direction. But still, it was not the ruach of the original founders. So I heard this. I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure, but this is what I heard, that there was a banquet honoring the 100th yahrzeit of Rav Hirsch or something. And the Rav of the Kehila, who was also a Lakewood-trained person, got up and said, Torah and derech eretz is dead. Right now the only legitimate hashkafa is learning to the exclusion of everything else. So some of the old-timers who were still around, like in their 90s, they get up in their walkers. They can't even walk. they leave the room in protest because they felt that this was a takeover of their kehila by a hashkafa that Rav Hirsch himself would never have agreed to. So it is a fascinating machlokas. What is the shita? Now, there is one point I do want to make, though, and that is, even if we learn that Rav Hirsch lechatchila felt that a secular education was a valuable adjunct to Torah, let's go with that mahalach. That doesn't necessarily mean he would support going to a university today. Because you have to understand this. A university in Germany in the 19th century, well, it was a Christian place for sure, but it was a very disciplined place. People were dressed tznius. There was no drugs. There was no alcohol. The atmosphere was a very refined and civil atmosphere. And the only problem is you were exposed to different ideas. Rav Hirsch felt that the Torah will give you the ability to deal with all of these ideas. So the biggest problem of the 19th century university is, you might read Spinoza, you might read Immanuel Kant. That may pervert your mind. Today, it's almost halvai that the problem of going to college was somebody's going to read Spinoza. The problem today is drugs, is sex, is all sorts of taivas. So all I'm saying is, Rav Hirsch validated secular education. But that doesn't mean he would have validated the atmosphere that one encounters in a college today. So if it's Torah or YU, maybe a different story, but a lot of colleges are just not a place where a moral person can really live. So it's important to understand that you can't just take what he said 150 years ago and automatically apply it today, not because the teaching changes, but because the mitzvah changes. If the mitzvah changes, so you have to paskin, in accordance with the mitzvah. So I would not say that Rav Hirsch would necessarily encourage going to universities today. Okay, anything? Yeah.
Do we still have the leviim of Yissachar Zevulun relationships today? And does it specifically have to be 50%?
Well, we do have Yissachar Zevulun relationships today, and in fact, even in Ohr Somayach itself, I'm aware of R'Chaim that have various contracts. Now, let's first take the simple Yissachar Zevulun, a 50-50. Then I'll get to your second question. Even the 50-50, there's actually a lot of machlokim, and here's the issue. Let's say I enter into a partnership with somebody who will give me my parnasa, and in exchange, we're going to divide the reward for my learning, like 50-50. Now, does that mean 50-50, meaning, let's make up a number. Let's imagine that the reward for my Torah learning equals 1,000,000 olam haba points. It's a made-up number. So does that mean I only get 500,000 and he gets 500,000? Or does it mean million, meaning Hashem doubles it, meaning I get my 1,000,000 and he gets my 1,000,000? Or does it mean I get 1,000,000 and he gets half of my 1,000,000? So there are three possibilities. Assuming my aggregate schar is 1,000,000, is Yissachar Zevulun 1,000,000? Is it 500,000, or is it 1,000,000 and 500,000? Right. So there are many different shitas exactly how it is going to be divided. But at a minimum, the one that supports me will get 50% of my schar. Okay, that's going to be a minimum. So the question is, can it be divided in different ways? The answer is absolutely yes. But then you'd have to just recompute everything. If I give half of your parnasa, so I'll get 25% of your learning, and the like, 1/3, etc. So you just recompute it for everything. Now you may wonder like this. You may ask a very simple question. Well, wait a second here. This seems to be a real bad deal for the learner. Because if you're telling me I would get 1,000,000 without the help, and if you go like the Shita, that I only get 500,000 with the help, then why would I want to do that? What? I'm trading half of my schar for money? Now, sometimes if you're really starving, sometimes you have to do that. But why would I do that? So like the other Shitas, you're not losing anything. But like the Shita of 50-50, you are mamish, you're losing. But I think the answer is positive. The answer is that you can learn more, meaning to say, if you would not have the support, you wouldn't be able to learn up to 1,000,000. So you would get 100% of what you did, but it would be less. So it could very well be that by giving up half of the extra that I can learn, I might still be in a better position than I would have been without the help. So that's kind of the calculation that would be involved. Yeah.
What Hosh Ashkafa is the same Ashkafa of Hosh and not of Hosh. Pertaining to the Chokas Matachelis because it's not scientific discoveries and it's the same Ashkafa just in modern day.
Okay, I'm not following. You say again. The chelas and the
same focus
is what?
of Hosh and not of Hosh. Hosh is into secular application.
Oh, refer. Yeah.
And now the normal LED Ashkafa.
In other words, resistant to change. I mean. Well, again, the yeshiva hashkafa, and this changes in time also, largely was looking at the outside world as dangerous, looking at the outside world as something that will take you away from Hashem. And as a result, they didn't want to have any connection to it. And that's the Charedim view, largely in Eretz Yisrael. And that's kind of the Lakewood view as well. But the truth is, people are not purists anymore. They tell a story about a fellow that was supporting his sons-in-law in learning. And the deal was, this is in Europe, I will give you a beautiful fleshik meal every day, and I will give you a beautiful milchik meal every day. That was the deal. And the sons-in-law were always fighting, who is more esteemed, the one who gets steak or the one who gets blintzes and all the scrambled eggs and all sorts of stuff. So they were fighting about who is more chashuv. Eventually, though, the balabayas lost his wealth, and he could no longer afford milchiks or fleshiks. So he gave both of them potatoes, but to fulfill his promise, one got potatoes in a fleshik pot, and one got potatoes in a milchik pot. And they were still fighting. Who was more chashuv? So the father-in-law said to them, listen, when you were getting steak and you were getting blintzes, all right, you could argue about who's better off. But potatoes are potatoes. Potatoes in a milchik pot, potatoes in a fleshik pot. One is not better than the other. The remez of the story is that today, the lines, let's say between Hasidim and Misnagdim, etc., they're not as rigid, they're not as impermeable as they once were. The Hasidim are not fully Hasidim, the Misnagdim are not fully Misnagdim. Those who are against secular studies might acknowledge, although not in Eretz Yisrael, they're still very tough, but let's see, in America, Lakewood guys might go to college, etc. So a lot of the boundaries are not as rigid as they used to be, although once again, in Eretz Yisrael, they still are actually fairly rigid. But there's more moderation. There is more moderation than there was. Now, you could say, you could describe that in two ways. You could say, niskatnu adoros, people are just not committed anymore. Or you can say that maybe we're willing to see the emes in different perspectives, meaning, is that all bad? Or maybe the pshat is, I see a nakuda here, I see a nakuda here, right? So you can look at it in two different ways. But people are not quite as absolutist as they were, although again, I'll repeat, Eretz Yisrael, we still live in the world of absolutes here, but certainly in Chutz Laretz, there's a lot of, you can call it assimilation, even in the frum world, a certain degree of assimilation. So, who knows? R'Chaim Kanievsky said, on all of these inyanim, Charedim, derech, eretz versus Torah only, that it's not an either or. He actually said it's elu v'elu divrei Elokim chayim, that both of these have emes, and both of these have a makam in Klal Yisrael, and it depends on the person, and the individual, and the situation, and it's not shayach to say that one shita is totally right, and one shita is totally wrong. I often have this feeling. I sometimes see, Charedim Rosh Yeshivas, and they're schmoozing with the doctor or the lawyer or the accountant who helps the yeshiva out a tremendous amount. And I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't get in my private. I'm thinking to myself, hey, you're talking to this from doctor, but according to this philosophy, this from doctor is an apikaris. I mean, he left the base medrash. He went to medical school. So now all of a sudden he's the guy you're honoring at your banquet. And what's going on? How 5 years before, 10 years before, says, apikaris, how do you leave the base medrash to go to medical school? 10 years later, he's respected in the Charedi world. How do you explain that exactly? I don't know. But I think the pshat is, this is an example of the boundaries. Klal Yisrael needs from doctors. Klal Yisrael needs from lawyers. Klal Yisrael needs from accountants. So to simply take the position that all of these things are illegitimate and worthless and wastes of time is not really what the Shita is. It's not real. Maybe Rav Shimon Bar Yochai would have said that. But short of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, right? So in many, many ways, again, forgive me for just wandering around, but in many, many ways, the rhetoric is stronger than the actual mitzias. There's a certain rhetoric, a certain language, because we want people to understand how important learning is. So we say, stay away from everything else. But in reality, how kol maidim, that we need those other things too. Okay, so there's a disconnect between the presentation of an idea and the actual way the idea is going to be expressed in real life. Yeah.
The Haredi world usually says that the lomdei Torah are shevet levi. Isn't the lashon of the Rambam the lamdei Torah, the ones that teach Torah?
Yes, that is correct. Again, without getting into the politics of army service, which I don't really want to get into, but one of the arguments that B'nai Torah should not serve in the army is a passage, even Milchemes Mitzvah, even a war to defend Klal Yisrael, is a passage in the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel, where the Rambam says that shevet Levi was patur from all milchamos, even Milchemes Mitzvah, because their task was exclusively to avodas Hashem. Now that's shevet Levi, and then the Rambam says that this is not only shevet Levi, but anyone who totally devotes himself, etc., can become an honorary Levi. Now the Rambam obviously doesn't mean you're a Levi legamri. You can't get Meiser Rishon, and you don't get the second Aliyah, but he means spiritually you're like a Levi. Now you are correct if you look at the language very, very carefully. You'll see that the Rambam emphasizes that shevet Levi's goal was to teach Torah, not just to learn Torah. And therefore, one who is simply learning and not teaching might not get the shevet Levi exemption. It's a good diuk. But on the other hand, in defense of the Charedi position of shevet Levi, the argument would go that in order to become a teacher of Torah, a person needs many, many years of learning Torah. And the point would be that eventually, not everybody, but eventually, a very large percentage of Avreichim are going to be, on some capacity, Malamdei Torah. They'll be Marbitzei Torah. So even if right now they're not Marbitzei Torah, I mean, after all, when the Rambam says shevet Levi is exempt, I mean, let's say you had an 18-year-old kid who was not, the Rambam is exempting the whole shevet, because from these people will come the Malamdei Torah. So that would be the defense. Yeah.
Some people learn Torah on Christmas. Is that a real thing? And also, they didn't do that in Christian.
Yeah. So okay. So Yeshka's name was Yehoshua, and Jesus is nothing more than the Greek for Yehoshua. So Yehoshua ben Nun would be called Jesus ben Nun, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying Jesus. It's a name, Yehoshua. It's Greek for Yehoshua. The word Christ, just the word Christ, means Mashiach, anointed one. It's in Greek. So you can say the word Christ. You could say Christ, the son of David. You could say Mashiach ben David. Again, sounds bad. But you should not connect the word Christ with Yashka's name, because that would be calling him Mashiach, right? So that's why you don't use that combination. Either word by itself is okay, as long as you're not referring, but tziruf, there is a problem. So the question becomes the holiday, the non-Jewish holiday of December 25. Are you allowed to say that name? Because you are referring to the birthday of Yashka and you're using the word Christ in that name. Are you somehow saying it? So again, some are machmir, some will not say it, but I'll leave it the MS. You're allowed to refer to it as a holiday because that's the holiday name. You're not saying that, you're not affirming anything about him. So people do say it. Now, some people will say instead of Christmas, I'll make a lot of it, they'll say Xmas. They say Xmas. Xmas is actually worse than Christmas. Xmas is not a made-up thing. X is the Greek letter for Christ. So you're actually saying it even more so in that way. So that's not going to help you. Either you're mako or you don't say it at all. Yeah.
Is it true that the more effect and control you have on the world, the less free will you have? And by that logic, how does it work with the bigger the tzaddik, the greater the nisayon?
Yeah, so this is based on a pasuk in Mishlei that says, Leiv malachim v'sarim biyad Hashem. That means the heart of kings and princes or officers are in the hand of God. And that is actually referring primarily to political leadership. And that is, you're a private guy, so you have free will to do this or do that. And Hashem does not interfere with your free will. You live by the consequences of your own individual actions. But Shlomo HaMelech is conveying the idea that when the decisions you make are going to affect, potentially, millions of people, a whole nation, so God has to take charge of that. God cannot simply allow Trump or anybody to exercise their unlimited free will in whichever way they go, because that's not only going to affect Trump, that's going to affect the whole world. Indeed, it will affect the whole world. So as a result, Hashem curtails the free will to direct the decisions in a certain direction. Now, that doesn't mean free will is supplanted, but Hashem will put certain limits. Hashem will not allow Trump to destroy Iran into oblivion because it'll probably, whatever. In other words, he's not going to be able to go as far as he says he's going to go, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not let him go to that degree. So it's not a denial of free will, but it's Hashem will put the limits on the havoc that you're capable of causing by your free will. Now, based on that, I've heard people say, surprisingly, that according to that, elections make no difference whatsoever. In other words, Biden versus Trump, Netanyahu versus somebody else, who cares? Because no matter who's elected, it's Hashem that's going to make the decision, and presumably Hashem is going to make the decision no matter who is in office. So I've heard people make the argument, there is literally no religious reason to ever vote for anybody or anything based on Leiv Malachim. It's an interesting argument, but it's obviously wrong, because why do the Gedolim themselves say, vote for this candidate, vote for this candidate? Why? Leiv Malachim Misarim B'Yad Hashem. Right? The Gedolim are telling you to vote. And Lamaisa, we do see that just practically, leadership matters. If certain candidates are elected, things happen, other candidates. So the only way to understand it is that Hashem does not usurp the free will. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply putting limits. But within those limits, some leaders might do things that are much worse than other leaders, but Hashem will allow those limits. So because of that, elections do matter, and there would be an inyan to vote for the candidate that is best for Ruchnius or Torah, whatever criteria you're using. All I'm saying is, don't use the pasuk in Mishlei as kind of a fatalism that no matter what happens, no matter who's in office, the same thing is going to happen. That's not real, and the reason would be as I explained it. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Is there a way to understand creation? Creation presupposes the existence of time, and time itself would seem to be a creation.
Well, yeah, I think that's exactly the point. When you say creation presupposes time, time is a creation, and this is absolutely the Jewish approach, and this is absolutely the physicist's approach as well. That time is a created entity, that time came into being simultaneously with space, in what Einstein called the space-time continuum. And therefore, a physicist might say, it's not meaningful to discuss what happened before the Big Bang, because there's no concept of before. So all I would say is that creation does not presuppose time, but rather time is something that emerged with the simultaneity of the creation of matter. And therefore time and space come into being at the same moment.
Creation isn't to cause something to exist, and cause doesn't presuppose time.
Listen, from a normal standpoint, you're 100% correct. I mean, I can't say I fully understand this. In other words, it is extremely difficult for any human being, and even a physicist, to understand what it means to have a state of even nothingness without time. I mean, how can time not pass? I mean, what does it mean, time? So I don't know. I mean, I can repeat the words that time came into existence, which means there was a moment where something didn't exist, and then it existed. And the only vocabulary we have to describe that is before and after. And before and after presupposes time. You're 100% correct. So I don't know. It's a real take. Yeah, that's Galileo and Navi to try to explain it. But all the Meforshim say that time is a creation itself. Okay, last question. Yeah.
Why some Haredi rabbis are not recognized not Haredi rabbis?
I'm sorry, about a Haredi rabbi and a non-Haredi rabbi?
Some Haredi rabbis not recognized.
Oh, yeah. I don't like to get into personality. Why do some Haredi rabbis, Baruch Hashem, not recognize non-Haredi rabbis? Yeah. Again, I think it's largely unfortunate, but the basic idea would be this. Number one, in Eretz Yisrael, a non-Haredi rabbi will generally be a Zionist rabbi. And if you are a person who considers Zionism to be a non-kosher philosophy, then they will not recognize the non-Haredi rabbi, because non-Haredi rabbi is a Tzioni, and we consider Tzioni to be no good. The non-Haredi rabbi might support the drafting of B'nai Torah into the army. But I'm not giving you any of my positions right now. I'm just describing two other people out there. Why A will not recognize B. I'm C in this discussion. Right? Okay. So A will not recognize B because B is a Zionist. B is in favor of drafting yeshiva bachrim. B celebrates Yom Ha'atzmaut with the barbecue and Hallel with the bracha. So a lot of these ideas are very profoundly disturbing to a Haredi rabbi who will say that the non-Haredi rabbi is leading people astray by inculcating them with false hashkafas. Now, is this right? And is it true? Yesh v'yesh. But if you're asking me a descriptive question, why? This would generally be the basic reason. Okay, you all have to take care.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.